Hello everyone, welcome to Wild Woodland Lavender Farm. My name is Carrie and today I am doing another in my series of what can I make with rhubarb. And today is one that I talked about earlier, and it is going to be the 2-ingredient rhubarb jam. It's very simple to make. I've made it a couple times already this season. I've made it in years past. It's quite a favorite with those in our family that actually do like jam. Not everybody does in my family. But I've made 2 batches so far, and this will be my 3rd, and I'm excited to get the stuff in the pantry so that we can have it all year long. So, how do you make 2-ingredient rhubarb jam? Well, it's quite simple. You need rhubarb, you need sugar, and that's it as far as ingredients. For tools that you need a nice pot with a thick bottom. At least I like to use one with a thick bottom because then it's protected against scalding a lot better than if you had a thin-bottomed pan. Yeah. You'll want something to stir with. So I have a spatula here. You'll want a bowl to put the rhubarb in. What else do you want? You need jars. I am making a double batch, so I'm needing about 4 or 5 jars. The lids, of course, and the rings to go with them, and then a canner. This is treated, even though this is vegetable, rhubarb is a vegetable, it is treated like a fruit when we can it. So, let's see, I think that's about it. There's other little tools here and there that you might find that you need, like a spatula for one. But let's get to work, and I've already prepped the first step. The first step is mixing the 2 ingredients together. So you need, per recipe, you need 6 to 7 cups of chopped rhubarb. And I did a double batch, so it's about 14 cups. Basically about 2 pounds per batch. I'm doubling it, so I have 4 pounds here. So you'll cut that up, you'll put it in a bowl. I've got this lovely stainless steel bowl, and then you're going to mix in the sugar. Now the sugar amount can vary according to how tart you want it. So one recipe I found calls for a 1/2 cup to 2 cups per that 2 pounds of rhubarb. So if you only want a 1/2 cup of sugar, that's going to leave a pretty tart jam. I wanted ours to be a little on the sweeter side. I didn't go with the 2 cups per 2 pounds. I did more like 1 1/3 to probably about 1 1/2 cups per 2 pounds. So in total, I have 4 pounds of rhubarb here and about 3 cups of sugar. So you're going to stir the sugar into the jam, and I have taken pictures of that and video of that earlier when I was going through this process. You want to let the sugar, you want the rhubarb and the sugar to percolate, meaning that you want the sugar to draw out the juices from the rhubarb. So what I have in here is rhubarb with a lot of liquid. Now to make the jam, what we want to do is actually separate the juice from the rhubarb. So I am going to use a strainer. Now I've used a strainer that I can hook onto my pan here and then just pour the juice into it without taking out all the rhubarb. But you can also use a strainer that can fit into a bowl that it sits on like that. And that way you can dump all of the rhubarb in there and get all of the liquid out. Alright, I'm going to let that rhubarb strain just a little bit. Let all that sugary juice strain down into the other container. And I wanted to show you the difference between my two batches of jam. The first one that I did ended up with a little bit of the syrupy juice separated from the jam down here. And the second batch that I did, you can see there's no separate layers. The difference between these two is that I let this jam cook longer and become more thicker, and so the juices were then more combined with the pulp of the rhubarb. This one I didn't cook as long, and so they separated out. This will still be just fine. You can leave it as is. When you open it up, you can give it a stir if you want, but really this turns out just fine. It's just maybe not going to be as thick as this will be because the sugar and the syrup becomes thicker the more you cook it. I think this has strained enough. I'm going to put the rhubarb back in the bowl, and we'll use that later on. To begin with the jam, I'm going to put the juice into the thick bottomed pan that I have. The next step is to cook the juice over medium heat. I'm going to put this on about 5, and then I'll just kind of watch it as it starts to boil. I'll stir it occasionally. Don't generally have a problem with it sticking or scorching at this point, but you just want to make sure not to cook it too long. You definitely don't want to scorch it. So I'm just going to watch for this to start boiling, and then we're going to let it boil for a few minutes to basically get rid of the liquid so that it boils down into a nice syrup. So you see it's starting to boil some. Got a nice simmer going on. Just gonna stir it every now and then. Get some steam as we do. You can see it's quite liquidy, and actually when we're gonna put the rhubarb in, it's still gonna be quite liquidy. I can't really tell anyway that it's syrupy at all. I will notice that the amount, the level of liquid has gone down some, just because we're steaming off so much of it. So we're just going to continue to cook this down a little bit longer before we add the rhubarb. I've let this boil down some. To me, it's looking a little bit darker. I don't know if it actually is or if it's just the lighting in here. But Sidon, Sidon's got a plastic bottle he's playing with. It looks a little darker to me anyway, more condensed. So I'm going to be adding in the rhubarb now and get that cooking. Sidon, stop. Right, I need to let this boil, get back up to heat so that this the rhubarb starts to soften up. And you can see now, we've got the solid chunks there, pretty firm. We want those to soften up and basically fall apart. So we're going to let this heat back up and get to boiling again. At this point, my rhubarb has reached a boil again with the rhubarb added to it this time. So now we need to let it cook for about 5 minutes now that it's at a boiling. I don't particularly time it because I know what I'm looking for when it's going to be done cooking for how thick that I want it to be. So after it's cooked for the 5 minutes, or once you get the feel for what kind of texture you want, what kind of thickness you want, you can do a test with the plate where you take a cold plate that you've kept in the freezer maybe, and you put some of the jam on it and see if it runs, or see what kind of consistency it has, so that you can get that nice gelled texture consistency. I just go until it feels right, and when it's boiling it'll reach kind of a different bubble when it's boiling. So right now you can kind of see that it's a very liquidy boil. Let me show you. So you can see here, it's just a very liquidy bubble. As it thickens up, I'll show you that the bubbles will change as it's cooking and not be quite so liquidy. We're about halfway there. You can kind of see the rhubarb has definitely been breaking up. Sorry about the steam. It's starting to break up a lot, become softer, and then the bubbles, still liquidy, but you can see they've gotten just a little bit thicker and they become a little more spitty. How's that for a technical term for you? Spitty. Still not quite there yet. We'll check back in a few minutes. We're starting to reach the stage that I want. There's a different sound to the bubbles. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but there's a definite different sound to the bubbles as they're popping. We're still not quite to the stage that I want, but we're almost there. If I give it a stir, which you do want to stir it occasionally, you don't want it sticking to the bottom. It's best if you don't, of course, cook it on high, but just on medium high. But as I stir it, you can kind of see a different kind of bubble, and that's what I want all over the place when I'm done stirring it, is I want that kind of poofy bubble. Kind of makes a poof sound. A little bit longer. Alright, this is definitely what I want. It's starting to spit out stuff. It doesn't maintain a bubble so much on top anymore, but it breaks immediately. So this is what I would say is ready. I'm going to let it cook just a minute longer while I get the jars and lids ready to put this into. It's ready to take off the stove and start putting into jars now. So I'm using wide mouth jars in pint size. The recipe calls, or the recipe states that one recipe will make 3 half pints, which would be the smaller jars. Since I'm doing the double recipe, then it would make 6 half pints. I don't like to make jam in half pint sizes for my family because we would just go through so many jars, and with lids being scarce these days, I want to make good use of my lids, so I'm putting jam into pint jars instead. So with 6 half pints, that would give me about 3 pints, but I've generally noticed that I get about 4 pints. It can depend on how much sugar you put in, because the amount of sugar you put in, if you put in more sugar, then it's going to take up more jars. Less sugar, less jars. So I'm just going to ladle these in. You can use a funnel, the wide mouth canning funnel if you like. I don't like to use those necessarily with the wide mouth jars. I'll just take a scoop and aim for the middle. And then if I get some on the side or on the rim, I'll just wash it off. And we fill it to about 1/4 inch from the rim. I just eyeball it. I do have one of those measuring devices, but I typically can just eyeball it. You can use the measuring device if you want. A bit shaky there for you. If you freeze it, you'll want to put it in containers, because you can just put it in the freezer at this point, or just right into your fridge to use up. That works too. I'm actually going to be canning these with a steam canner, so I'm gonna get the lids on, get the rings on, and get them sealed up so that I can store them. Looks like I'm going to get about 4 pints from this. A little bit extra, which I have a jar in the fridge that I can add the extra to. No problem. Okay, I'm just going to wipe the rims down. I'm just using a damp paper towel. You can use a damp, clean cloth too, works just fine. This is so that you can create a clean surface for the seal to take place. If there's something obstructing the seal, then it won't seal, obviously. It's a little bit about bacteria too, but it is more about creating a clean seal, firm seal. All right, that's clean. I'm using Tatler lids. They've got it's the reusable plastic, and then they have the gaskets that these are reusable too. They're rubber gaskets, completely reusable, all parts. I love using these. I love that they're reusable. The only thing I don't like is they don't make that lovely popping sound when they're sealing up at the end of processing them. Other than that, they are great to use. Tighten the rings on. Oops, wrong size. I saw a comment on one of the posts about Tatler lids that the plastic lids were reusable but not the gaskets, and I was just like, no, the gaskets are reusable too. But I just wanted to show you the difference in batches here. This was the first batch of rhubarb jam that I did, and this was the one, of course, I just did today. So you can see the difference in color. The only difference there is that this rhubarb that I used was more red than this rhubarb. It's all gonna taste the same though. Delicious. Okay, I'm gonna get these in the steam bath canner and get them processed. For those of you that have done canning before, you've probably used water bath canning or the pressure canners. With the water bath canning, of course, it's for the fruits, for the acidic foods like that, and the pressure canner is for the, the non-acidic foods, the vegetables. This is a steam canner. It's not very common, but it's something that I grew up using with my mom or my grandma using, and once I went out on my own, I wanted my own steam canner. I've used a water bath canner, and I would use a steam canner any day over a water bath canner. It's very simple to use, but you do want to make sure that you're using it properly and know when to start the timer for how long to process and whatnot. So this comes in 3 parts. We have the base here that holds the water, and as you can see, it doesn't take as much water as a water bath canner. That's all that I need. It's got a tray here to hold the jars. It's got holes in it so that it lets the steam up. That sits on top there, and it tells you this side up. Now this is a pretty old canner, and I don't know if you could find one that looks like this, but I did notice in the canning sections there is a new redone steam canner. It's got a gauge on top that says when to start the timer, etc. And according to what sea level, what level above sea you're at, elevation you're at. And it's, pretty cool and kind of an updated version of this. But this is still pretty easy to use and pretty basic. So what you do is you put the water in there, you put this on here, then you're going to want to turn it on high to boil the water. Now you might notice that I have a glass top stove. Apparently that's a big no-no when you're canning. I can understand when it's the pressure canner. That would kind of freak me out to use on the glass top stove. And even with the water bath canner, because that can get pretty heavy with the weight of the water in it, and then you add the weight of the jars. But with the steam canner, it is not as heavy as the others, and as long as you're not going to be dropping your glass jars on the top, I'm not worried about it. So this is where you place the jars. It can hold up to 7 or 8 quarts. Let's see, 3, 4. So it's about 7 quarts or 8 pint jars. So I'm going to put these a little more evenly spaced like that. And then this is the lid. And I think you can actually turn this over and use it as a pot. Anyway, I've never done that. So you just put the lid over the jars like this. Now, how do you know when to start timing? How do you know that they're done? So just as in the water bath canner, well, you look for the water to boil in that, and then you know that the water is hot and ready. That was another complaint with using the glass top stoves, is that the elements will go on and off. And the thing with that is that they think it's not keeping the water at an even temperature, but it is. It will heat the water to boiling, and then the water is still boiling. The elements are just turning on and off to maintain that temperature. Even with a regular stove without the glass top, with just the elements that you can see on top, they do the same thing. So it's no different than a non-glass top stove. Anyway, how to tell when this is ready? I'm just gonna wait for the water to boil, and then as it boils, of course, the water is steaming, and the steam is collected in here. Once the steam is starting to escape the sides, it is ready to start timing, and then you can set your timer for however long. In this case, the recipe calls to process them for 10 minutes with the half pint jars. Since I'm doing pint jars, I just add an extra 5 minutes just to give it that extra time to process in there. So we're going to wait for the water to boil, and then we're going to set the timer and get these sealed up. Just note that we started at 5:27 to get the water boiling. So here we are at 5:33. And I'm even a little late coming to video, but you can see that the steam is just pouring out. So this is my hint. It's time to start my timer. I'm gonna set it for 15 minutes. And then we'll be done. The timer's gone off. These are ready to take out. So, get my hot pads on, mitts. Then I do like to be careful because sometimes the hot water that's condensing on the sides will spill out. So I just lift it carefully. These are ready to come out. And just put them over. I usually like to put them on a towel so they're not sitting right on the counter and have that temperature change. And then I like to drape a towel over them. Keep any cool breezes off. And then this is all ready to go again. Just got to make sure if you are doing another batch that it has enough water in it. But if you're doing more jars, it's very simple to just put a new batch on. If they're cold jars, you want to be careful, of course, with the steam. But if they're hot jars, you just stick them on, put the lid back on, and you're ready to roll again. Very nice and easy to use, and a lot quicker, in my opinion, than water bath canning. Anyway, that is 2-ingredient rhubarb jam. Yet another thing you can make with rhubarb. Thanks for joining me at Wild Woodland Lavender Farm. We'll see you next time.